As we talk a little bit about the best team in the NBA, because the Celtics, they just continue to roll through the league. Perk, I'm afraid to even ask this. Is this team better than the version that made the finals?
Yes, right? So with this team and the growth of that dynamic duo, the best duo in the league at Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, yes, they are better than last year, and they should be the favorites to win it this year.
Well, this is awkward. The Boston Celtics are currently being embarrassed by the Miami Heat, and for a team with the most talent in the NBA, this level of a beatdown is unacceptable. I mean, if you want to talk about unacceptable, in a must-win Game 3, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown combined for less points than Gabe Vincent. Two players that could be earning a combined $100 million next year scored less points than someone on a $2 million a year contract. Or how about Duncan Robinson blowing past defensive specialists to get to the rim? Duncan Robinson. However, before we talk about any of that, you know things are bad when your head coach says this following Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals.
Biggest game of the season, a game you had to have. You guys just looked completely lost after the first 6 minutes. What exactly happened out there?
I just didn't have them ready to play.
I don't want to say you lost this team, but is there a disconnect between you and the players at this point?
Yeah, that's where I have to be better, is figure out what this team needs to make sure that they're connected, they're physical, and they're together by the time we step on the floor.
Now, Joe Mazzulla has made quite a few questionable decisions throughout these playoffs, but I want to take you guys back to Game 2 of this series. There are 6.5 minutes left in the game when this happens. And we all know what happened after this, but the most ridiculous part of this entire 6 minutes was the fact Jimmy Butler was allowed to isolate not once, not twice, but 4 consecutive times against Grant Williams. Every single time clearing out the right side of the floor with shooters spacing out on the left side. And the Celtics didn't at any point try to send help. Not once. They just accepted it. And the reason I mention this is because if you look at the second quarter of Game 3, the Heat once again had the floor cleared out for Jimmy to work. On these two plays, however, the Celtics sent help, rotating over to force a turnover on this possession, and then a couple of minutes later, forcing an air ball. This wasn't the first time this happened either. If you guys can remember all the way back to the first round, with the Celtics up 3-1 and looking to close out the series, Boston allowed Trae Young to play in isolation for the entirety of the fourth quarter, making shot after shot and eventually forcing a Game 6 with no resistance from Boston. However, let's get back to the Miami series, and forget about Joe Mazzulla for a second. We need to talk about Jaylen Brown, because for a player that is constantly compared to and often called better than Jason Tatum, the standards, well, they just aren't remotely the same. Throughout 3 games in this series, Brown has been nothing short of bad, averaging 17, 6, and 3 on awful efficiency. And look, it's one thing to have a bad stretch of shooting, it's everything else that is problematic with Jaylen. Right here are the 3 turnovers Jaylen Brown recorded in Game 3 against Miami.
Undrafted player, 4th year, crossover Brown, hits the deck, loose ball, Lowry, Martin at the other end, different level. Turnover right there, Butler in, knocked it away, numbers, the trailing Adebayo in the corner, Robinson, it's a 3.
Not only did these turnovers lead to 5 easy points, but this is an all-NBA player looking for a supermax, just straight up tripping over his feet and dribbling the ball into the legs of other players. This isn't even the first time we've seen this in this series. If you go back to Game 1, with the game in the balance, Jaylen drives straight into Bam before losing his footing, and then just 3 minutes later, Jimmy pokes the ball away from him on an ISO with ease. Throughout this series, Jaylen is averaging more turnovers than assists, and it feels like when Jaylen isn't scoring, he's not impacting the game at all. I mean, do I need to remind you guys of quite possibly the dumbest play I've seen all playoffs? There are 25 seconds left on the clock with the Celtics up 2. The game clock is separated by 14 seconds, so at the very worst, the Celtics will have a chance to win if the Sixers get it too. Joel Embiid has the ball against Tatum, which seems like a mismatch, but this is the same Joel Embiid that was horrendous for an entire quarter prior to this. Jaylen Brown decides, let me help off James Harden, who had 40 points at the time, to give up an open corner 3, and well,
Harden for the 3, got it!
But this didn't end here. With 18 seconds left to get a good shot, the Celtics refused to take a timeout. Okay, that would be fine if they didn't spend the next 13 seconds doing nothing. There's 5 seconds left on the clock, and Tatum has the ball at half court with the action barely starting, and well, would you look at that, time runs out. And I mention this because despite it not being related to the embarrassment that is the Miami series, this is a team with more collective playoff experience than any other team in the NBA. Since 2017, the Boston Celtics have the second most playoff wins, only behind, that dynasty, and even crazier, they've played more playoff games than any other team in that period of time. 30 more than third in Milwaukee. So I don't care if Brown and Tatum are 25, some of the mistakes this team has made make no sense, and it's the reason they're down 0-3 against Miami. Everyone will point to Game 3, but the first 2 games were in the balance. Look no further than Game 2. Lost in the Grant Williams and Jimmy Butler beef was the fact that over the last 8 minutes of the game, Grant Williams was the only Celtics player to make a single field goal over 8 minutes. And this is where Jason Tatum needs to be held accountable as well. Because do you want to know how many field goals he has made in the fourth quarter of this series? Take a good guess. If you've guessed 0, you would have been correct. And this is the difference between him and the best players in the league. This series, it's been his fourth quarter scoring, but against Philadelphia in games 4, 5, and 6, he was horrendous in 3 straight first halves. Not just bad, but flat out awful, going 5 for 30 in those 3 first halves. Having your best player and MVP candidate consistently struggle for quarters and halves at a time is going to lead to massive momentum shifts, and that's what we've seen all playoffs long with the Celtics. It hasn't just been the stars or coaching staff though. On May the 6th, Al Horford said this.
That's just a part of it when you're an elite shooter. You're gonna get him up. You're laughing. You don't think I'm an elite shooter?
I do.
My numbers don't support it.
They do. The best man.
And the thing is, he wasn't lying. He finished the season shooting 45% from 3 on over 5 attempts a game, and I genuinely don't recall him missing a single shot all of last year's playoffs. Since he said that, however, he is shooting 28% from the field and 20% from 3. It got to a point against Philadelphia where he was refusing to look at the rim from beyond the arc. And we all know how fantastic he was defensively against Joel Embiid. But having this level of a shooting slump from someone who's supposed to be the ultimate big man floor spacer has been massively detrimental to this team's offense. An offense that was the best in the league for a large part of the regular season. And this is the problem with this Celtics team. The inconsistencies across the board has led to some embarrassing performances, and none more embarrassing than Game 3 against the Heat.